Okie dokie.
Yeah, so I guess we're alive.
Yep.
This is our fourth conversation.
Yep.
So
Yep.
previously we
Hi,
discussed
everybody.
axiology, epistemology, and now
Yeah.
finally it's metaphysics.
Oh boy. Fun times ahead.
So let's try to define it. Like,
Mhm.
is there any definition which we can agree on and which we can build upon?
It's metaphysics in kind of the academic sense. I'm gonna go on a limb and say like it is almost impossible to completely define it because of how many fields they put into metaphysics. You know, you have identity, you have ontology. Ontology could be its own goddamn branch of philosophy on its own. And free will determinism, you got problems of that's another thing that could be a branch of philosophy on its own modality. So it's really, really freaking hard to define metaphysics in that sense. In my own personal philosophy, I got into this last time. I bifurcate my ontology, and metaphysics is kind of, to me, it's more focused on the abstract. It's focused on the non-factual, okay? The stuff that isn't causally grounded. It isn't trying to deal with things in the factual world or reference or anything. It's dealing with the concepts themselves. It's trying to get to that.
Even when they are not like grounded in this world, right? Some abstract concepts which we can, like some categories, for example, right?
Yeah. It's very much so taking like the meta of metaphysics beyond, or kind of literally just going like, okay, what are the kind of focusing the understanding and concepts I even need to get to the physical, if I just consider those without even relating them to the physical. That's kind of how I define metaphysics. So if you want like a formal definition, it'd be more so like the dealing with abstract concepts, okay, in a consistent manner. That's pretty much it. The subject matter of abstract concepts. So
yeah, and again, the question immediately arises like, are the abstract concepts outside of this world in this sense, like outside the physical world, right?
Yeah,
or they just are the part of this world, since we are part of this world and we create these concepts, and therefore just
there are concepts that we could try to bring into the physical world, or we have tried. I'll go straight being mathematical with this. Like, it used to be that algebra and geometry were kind of seen as paired together, linking geometry, linking it to the physical world. But there were concepts that specifically could not be expressed or linked in the physical world through algebra, such as imaginary numbers, and this would be number theory beyond complex numbers, okay, that split it from like its physical grounding. Complex numbers are expressed as a plus b I, where a and b are real numbers, and I is the imaginary, the square root of -1. Those concepts don't approximate anything they couldn't. Like, I can go further with just geometry. Let's talk about Euclidean geometry. Anybody who's done geometry, usually in high school, their first geometry class, geometry on a flat surface. Okay, the thing is that doesn't approximate anything in our world. It can't. Do you know why? Because our world is three-dimensional. Okay, it doesn't operate on a two-dimensional. This was shown in Euclidean geometry with what's known as the fifth postulate, which makes sense in Euclidean geometry that two parallel lines equidistant will remain equidistant over an indefinite amount of time. But it doesn't work when we apply it to the real world. Why? Because we're on a curved surface. That doesn't apply. So a lot of these, and I'm talking mathematics right now, but this applies very much so to metaphysics. There are fields of study that when we try to ground them, causally to reference, they don't make sense. They break. They're no longer consistent. But when we just see them as abstract concepts in relationship to abstract concepts, then we're able to do all these amazing things with them and further our understanding that may or may have stuff to do with the real world. Mathematics, this would be like pure mathematics and foundational mathematics. Philosophy, this is metaphysics. That's what it's called. At least to me, this is what I would refer to it. But yeah.
Is it, again, like I still try to figure out this difference between physics and metaphysics. And it seems that, mathematics, yeah, it makes sense that we may say, for example, if we add the number, like add 1 to any number, we can get a bigger number. And in the physical world, we can't find anything to prove this, right? We can't just, it's presupposed in our knowledge, in our understanding, right? But still, it holds true for all the cases.
Well, but it holds true for some of the cases. It's not all the cases actually. Like adding 1.
Yeah, but when we do this operation in our mind, like it's it seems that this is like you can disprove it simply by saying, look, this, like in real world, there's no numbers as big as we can think of in our minds.
Yeah.
Right. Still, it's like we project our understanding on the real world, but we don't need the real world. Like in Kantian terms, it's like it's our understanding a priori.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be more so what you're getting at. It'd just be our understanding the phenomena, like the subjective experience versus the noumena, what Kant would say the thing in itself. And when we're just dealing with you brought up a priori, prior knowledge, it would be just the idea of having these prior known things and just working along. This would be analytic, just doing what follows from them. Okay. We're not necessarily synthetic, trying to touch something in the world. A lot of this with metaphysics is just like, I have these prior concepts and I'm just doing what follows from them. And some of them, when I try to make them approximate something in the world, that's what I'm trying to show with mathematics. Identity would be a great showing of this in philosophy. Sameness, that these two things are the same. When I try to make it approximate something in the real world, it breaks. It no longer operates like it does in just a purely rigorous world. It can't quite do that. So
what's the point to have this knowledge if it has nothing to do with the real world, with the world of experience? Is it just a kind of mind game?
I mean, I would say, for one, it's fun. I love metaphysics and I love pure mathematics and metamathematics. I love the idea of doing something just because you're passionate about it, not necessarily for a goal or teleological aspect, but it's fun. And the funny thing is, this way of thinking where we don't consider ourselves with referencing the world, but just taking like, okay, I'll do science, like in theoretical science, theoretical fields versus applied fields. Oftentimes what happens is when we can, dislocate that having to test or, having to apply it to the world and just build off of that prior knowledge and keep building, we can also often come to conclusions that while we may not be able to apply it or put it into any way, find out its application, might be able to further our understanding that later down the road, we come back and we go, oh my God, this person figured out, the framework or the tools to help us do this application later on. Or it may just be, building on mathematics for the sake of building on mathematics. A good example with mathematics to science for this would be something like higher dimensions. For a long time, people looked at that and thought, that's just a waste of time in mathematics, going through this. But then, you have string theory and all of a sudden the scientist comes back to the mathematician, like, well, what were you talking about with mathematics of higher dimensions there? That might actually be able to help me. Feynman does a thing on that. It's pretty funny.
Is it in any way different than science fiction? like, you know, in science fiction, we may also build on, you know, some assumptions and think that, you know, we develop our knowledge, but in fact it's just pure imagination.
Yeah,
But
it's
sometimes it comes later, like, and becomes the reality, right?
it could, you know,
Mhm.
it's possible. The big thing there would be like if the person's, you know, initial, like they're treating their science fiction like a hypothesis, like they're actually
Mhm.
going like this is they're making a prediction or a possibly false prediction of what could happen in that area. They're opening themselves up from falsehood. Whereas a lot of time, a lot of this stuff is just they're not opening themselves up. They don't even consider, you know, metaphysics or pure mathematics. They don't even consider what may happen. They don't care. They're just running with it. Uh, you can think of it like science fiction or fiction, though, in like in the fact that you're creating a possible world, or you could call it, the philosophical term would be possible world, or perhaps even a universe of discourse,
Mhm.
okay, in which these things are true and consistent, even though they don't align with the real world, okay? So we talked about fictional characters in Harry Potter, okay? Harry Potter, grounded to our real world, isn't real. Therefore, he can't have all these qualities or things that, but in the universe of discourse of the book Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, we can say things that are true or false about this character, Harry Potter, that he has a lightning bolt scar, that he's friends with Ron Weasley and Hermione. But if I said he was a friend of Draco Malfoy, you would say, no, that's false, you know.
Mhm.
So I have falseness and trueness in this not actual world that I can go with consistently. And this is, but you can take this understanding to metaphysics and mathematics, pure mathematics, where it's like, I'm not trying to approximate anything in the world. I don't care about the world. I'm just taking a set of assumptions or fiction or possibility, and I'm running with it in a consistent manner. That's all I'm doing.
Mhm.
So, or concepts.
Mhm.
So,
Uh, you know, I'd like to ask about studying metaphysics kind of together.
mm,
So, like, it seems possible that you may create a certain world, and it may be consistent in your own whatever, in your own way. But as soon as we start, you know, studying different metaphysics developed by different philosophers,
mhm.
it seems that it's almost impossible to come to in terms for two philosophers and, you know, agree on whatever they're talking about,
Oh yeah,
right?
that's kind of the many minds problem with morality or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
where everybody can assume, you know, their own possibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, if everyone can assume these things and just follow it consistently, people following consistently have no guarantee of landing on a similar point or having similar forms of reasoning or anything like that, because the forms of reasoning themselves are usually assumed or made up as they go along to kind of grasp it. Granted, there are systems that do have rules. You have logic, mathematics, you know, metaphysics absolutely has some rules, but a lot of these rules themselves that we agree by when we play these games of imagination are themselves assumed or made up from prior rules. They're
Mm-hmm.
just consistent ways to get from one area to the next.
Mm-hmm.
So there really is no guarantee of people agreeing or coming together on anything. I mean, they do, but the fact that they do is kind of kind of more so happenstance.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Uh,
in this case, how can we study? How can we study metaphysics? Like, is there any universal way? For example, I want to study metaphysics. What should I study? What should I read?
I mean, like I said, from my definition, you have the academic definitions, and from that there are absolutely subject matter that people would consider metaphysics, and you can study it. You can study the field of metaphysics. There are
Mm-hmm.
books on it. Kant covers a bunch. Aristotle came up with the term metaphysics,
Mm-hmm.
wrote the book Metaphysics. Which he focused primarily on like things like what we would come to know as like first principles or things that we assume even to go forward. Um, but or Descartes, but you can study things that we label metaphysics, and we call metaphysics in the field of metaphysics. The problem comes when we understand what these concepts are, and we go, okay, there's a difference from my understanding them and how I express them, how I can communicate them from one person.
Mhm.
Because in order to communicate these things, you have more of a limitation. This is where kind of metaphysics constantly bumps up against epistemology, specifically the philosophy of language and epistemology and symbolism, because I can study these things and I can express these things, but if I want to convince others of my rigor or my understanding, I have to find a way to express it that they can also understand it.
Mhm.
So not that I can just understand it. That isn't to say all of this is meant to, be communicated. Some of it is like a first person gesture understanding, like a reflecting or kind of self-motivated instead of a peer reviewed, like reinventing of your own understanding over and over again. So if you want to study it, there are topics, there are books, and technically you can do it. Just know that I would say before you get into metaphysics, I would highly recommend you study a decent amount of logic, at least propositional logic, and you get your epistemology in line before entering metaphysics, because you're going to want to be able to understand what people are expressing and how to get at these, because they're very abstract concepts. We use these terms in everyday life, but metaphysicians mean a very particular thing, and they're very abstract concepts when they're talking about them. And you really want to make sure you have the means to understand and express it yourself prior to getting into it. And
so logic
I
is
guess
logic is like a tool. So first you build some instruments, and then you go and try to do something with these instruments.
yeah, logic's basically your toolbox that you come bringing along with you everywhere. That's basically what it is. So it helps you, and it can't do everything, but damn if it doesn't help with doing quite a few things. So
I remember previously we discussed the shift or the turn in metaphysics in 20th century at this analytic philosophy versus continental philosophy.
Yep.
So they seem to part, like go in different directions. Can we discuss it a little bit, like on history of this shift?
So the big shift happened with the splitting of analytical and continental. Kind of the root of these two, where they find each other similarity, would be Kant, what we usually call traditional philosophy, where it kind of ends and then it splits off, and you get the analytical philosophers who really came about more in the Western world from Whitehead and Russell's book Principia Mathematica, and later Wittgenstein's Tractatus, which is really became like their Bible, like the most holy book to them, where they were really trying to say, we're not going to deal with metaphysics, we're going to hyper focus really the empirical and epistemological sides of these arguments. So hence the name, they got the name logical empiricist or logical positivist. So they worked on a correspondence theory of truth from the Tractatus, and were mainly concerned with the world of facts. They, a lot of the terminology you hear me use when we talk about epistemology is straight from this. It's from logical atomism, which was Russell and early Wittgenstein's approach. And then on the other side, on the continental side, they were still very much enamored with metaphysics. And most of this you get to see with the work on identity and ontology, with people who went into like phenomenology, who were trying to deal with how we say things are, exist, or not just how we say they are or how we know, but how are they existing, or how am I existing?
Mhm.
You know, which this would be more of the field you get. Went from Hegel to Husserl to Heidegger, that's the phenomenologist, and it would later grow into what we know as the existentialists, who are trying to figure out being in the world. So that's you know, Sartre, Camus, and Du Bois. So those people were really trying to deal with more of the concepts, not just like the facts in the world that were trying to be all grounded. They were trying to deal with the individual experience of
Mhm.
being in the world as a person. Of course, you had crossover with people who, like, you had people on the continental side who got really into literary analysis. Probably the most famous of this was Derrida. He
Mhm.
really got into the idea of breaking down, like, he may be credited with breaking down the entire semantical argument of the logical positivists, with really coming in saying, you guys completely undid semantics by trying to, you know, purely focus reference and facts, which is absurd when you think about it, when we're talking about people talking about or expressing things in the world. And you had people over, you know, in the West who were trying to deal, you know, still deal with individual experiences, you know, like here in the world. That I would say more the pragmatists, like William James, who are trying
Mhm.
to deal with, you know, how does an individual person come to like truth or fact, rather than, you know, like these uber smart academics who say you're fact or anything like that. But he focused more on things are true because you believe they are true, which in a metaphysical stance I think is great, but epistemological I think is crap.
Mhm.
But
So on the one side, we have people who study objective facts and the world itself, like kind of
yep,
independent world, and on the other side, those who are concerned with our subjective experience,
yeah,
right? And
and there was this bifurcation, and eventually what wound up happening was um, the analytical school that kind of tried to neglect the metaphysical and the subjective side, it wound up blowing up in their face, because what happens is members of their own Venetian circle, as well as Wittgenstein himself and Quine, came out and said this whole idea that we can just see the world as facts or just deal with facts is absurd. Like,
Mhm.
um, Wittgenstein famously had two instances when he showed up to the circle and he read poetry to all of them while his back was turned to them, you
Mhm.
know, to kind of insult them. Like, I guess the symbolism there is supposed to be like they were all turning their back on meaning, or like chase Popper around the room with a red hot poker, saying if he could come up with one purely rational reason why he shouldn't, you know, stab him with a poker, he would stop. Uh, but he was an eccentric. Uh, and then on the continental end, what kind of happened was, because they both had their own reckoning, because you had the reckoning on the analytical side with them coming to the crashing area that they kind of, you know, completely glossed over semantics and trying to break down modalities of truth. And you kind of had the crashing on the continental side, where it was, hey, we came to a lot of this useful information that we can kind of show, but it's really ambiguous. It's not fully like rigorously justified. So what you have then after that is a lot of crossover, where the gaps are trying to be filled in mainly by philosophers who worked in metaphysics, who came in, you know, on the analytical side, and we're trying to say like, okay, we need to get, you know, the subject matter back into here. How do we address it? And how do we kind of patch the holes that we kind of left when we did this split and get everything working together again?
Uh, was it in any way different from, you know, what we know as empirical schools versus rationalist schools, like Locke, Berkeley, and Hume versus Descartes, Leibniz, and Spinoza?
I mean, the big differences between them, and Kant would be the master at pointing this out,
Mhm.
was you know, the rationalists mainly thought there were universal truths that we could know through pure reasoning, that we
Mhm.
could come to. Kant uses the example of 5 plus 7 equals 12. That is a universal truth in all worlds. Or that a triangle has 3 sides to it. That is a universal truth, And then the empiricists on the other side would be like, no, there are Hume would be the famous one here. No, there are no universal truths that we can know in all worlds. Everything's just kind of, of an experience. And where these guys would come into these two aspects is like the empiricists would be kind of correctly along the lines of logical empiricists, positivists, who kind of wanted to focus on how we know these things and how we express these things, versus the rationalists, which I think the best showing of this would be Leibniz. So Leibniz, famously the guy who's usually accredited with coming up with calculus. True scholars know that it was actually Zeno, but not Newton or Leibniz, but Zeno. But or he came up from the Leibniz had this idea that everything, a monadology, that everything could be universally or approaching a universal truth, kind of Platonic, okay? That there were these eternal mathematical underlying things. Now, how these, matter to our little split here is, the rationalist, I mean, I don't know if it would, because both of them are kind of dealing with this problem. I don't know if I could categorize this to either one of these sides. I would just say there were tendencies in the analytical tradition more towards empiricism because they were dealing with facts, where I guess, no, the continental side dealt kind of both with the rational and empiricism problems, because they were worried about the individual's experience of the world and everything like that. But they kind of got more of the rational side because they were also worried about how one makes sense of their experience in the world, or what is kind of, knowledge. I mean, the analytical tradition also, fell in love with moving forward with formalized logic. So someone could argue that's foundations of mathematics. You can't get more rational than that. But yeah, I don't know if I would pair them off with either side of these guys. They kind of both were still trying to deal with that. And that's kind of more of an epistemological matter, because rationalism and empiricism are about how we come to knowledge. Do we come to it empiricism, do we come through it through experience, or do we come through it rationalism through just prior knowledge and come to it through pure reasoning? But yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of history there.
What's going on right now, like in these fields?
I mean, and which fields?
Oh, analytical versus continental. Is it still valid to consider this distinction, or?
It's still acknowledged and it's still a little bit distinct. I feel like right now it's more so just about what the student wants to focus on. If they want to focus on continental philosophy, and oftentimes, or if they want to focus on analytic philosophy, if your tendency or you want to focus usually more on analytic philosophy, you'd be doing stuff more like usually philosophy of language. You'd be taking logic classes, you'd be taking classes on linguistics, you will be taking really more so a formal approach, where I feel like continental philosophy, usually you take more classes geared towards like political science, sociology, psychology, and more so trying to approximate that individual or societal experience is kind of what you're trying to get at, versus just purely more formalize it into reasoning. So it's more informal versus formal approach. I mean, of course, there's overlap here, because if you're going to go through a philosophy, both of you are going to take philosophy 101. Both are going to take logic 101. I mean, there is definitely overlap, but it's more so the division now is just not so who won or who's, the better. It's kind of like, what are you looking to get out of it as a student? Are you more about being like an advocate for societal change and understanding like almost anthropology like approach or psychological approach, or do you want to have more of a formal? It'd be more so informal versus formal is kind of, and depending on that, you would be more geared towards continental or analytical philosophers is how you would wind up. So
is analytic philosophy in essence dogmatic, like this formal approach which demands from you like knowing certain certain ways of arguing and presenting certain points instead of just instead of some as it seems to me, there's in continental philosophy there's more creativity. Allows you like to think for yourself, to find something, maybe even to make something up, whereas analytic philosophy is just rigorous studying, knowing certain rules and following these rules in in everything.
I will say analytical philosophy is a lot more strict. So if you want to say like that there's rules that we all have to agree, in that sense dogmatic, it can kind of feel like that. It feels much more like there's a definite framework that you have to follow to really get your points across. But at the same time, continental philosophy, which seems a lot more fluid, I will say, okay, analytical philosophy is like studying for a math test. Okay, there are a couple rules you really have to have down, and you need to be able to express yourself through those rules. That'd be kind of dogmatic. Now, that's analytical philosophy. Continental philosophy, on the other hand, would be more like a history test. Okay, instead of knowing these rules and having to come to these areas, on the other hand, you have to read a bunch of work and memorize facts. Okay, just flat out be able to, it's more about using it as evidence versus rigor. So in this case, analytical would be more rational. Continental would be more empirical.
Yeah, but let's suppose we're not in the university. We're just studying philosophy for ourselves.
Well, no, if you were studying them just for yourself, you would come to that conclusion. I'm almost certain. If I handed you like two works, like a continental and analytical work, and I really don't want to start you off of Hegel, but I would set down dear God, I would set down Hegel, just the preface of Phenomenology of Spirit, just the preface, and I would have the Tractatus on the other hand. I would set them both down, like the two divine works, and you started studying these on your own. What you would notice right away is Hegel is written more so, as much as Hegel can be, is just like a normal like treatise, trying to work out an essay, citing past philosophers. And if you didn't know these past philosophers' work, you'd be confused, like just absolutely lost. But he does have a little bit of rigor there, but mostly it's just citing their work and replying to their work, or supporting or discrediting their work. Whereas Wittgenstein, the thing is, technically with Wittgenstein, you wouldn't have to know any past philosophers. I could just hand you the book. And the writing, because Tractatus is really short, it's only like 70 pages, it wouldn't seem intimidating at first, but you would start looking at it and you would try to make sense of the propositions, because it's labeled out P1, A1, A2, and you'd be like, what the hell? Who the hell writes like this? This makes no goddamn sense to know. So one, you kind of have to know like the history and the past philosophers. The other one, you have to know the process itself that the person is using. Which Wittgenstein, that's logic. That's flat out formalized logic that he is using. So that would be an excellent showing of the different processes.
Is it similar? Like I didn't read Wittgenstein, but what you described is kind of similar to Spinoza's ethics.
Yes, it is almost identical. The first time I read ethics before I read the Tractatus, and when I touched the Tractatus, I was like, oh my God, this is almost dead on, where it's like prop one. What Spinoza uses propositions, he uses definitions, and he uses what he called scholium, which was like a historical critique to like add on. And then Wittgenstein uses propositions, axioms, and I can't remember the other one, but he like definitely goes through and labels them. They look very similar, which it's hard to read. Okay, for some people it can be very taxing to read that style, but the nice thing about that style is you can see how people's reasoning follows from each one very clearly. Like it's laid out in the most kind of precise and almost like a proof laid out. Like this is how I'm coming to each conclusion. And I did a little bit on like how I reason on my whiteboard when we did the axology. It is very much like that, where I go, here's my definition, here's my sub definitions, here's the conclusions I can draw from this.
Like solving
And I try,
like solving equations.
yes,
right?
it's very much like that.
So don't tell me how, don't tell me the answer. Show me how did you come up.
Yes, show me how you got from here to here to here. And I do like that reasoning, because it's, you may not agree with my assumptions or where I arrive at, but y'all be damned if you question my reasoning to get into these things, like, or that I did the work, you know.
Let's touch on some of the fields of metaphysics. Like,
yeah,
we may start from free will, determinism.
okay. Free will, determinism, yeah, different kinds of both. Well, I'll touch on like the most simplistic kinds. We'll just free will being this idea that one can act according to their desires, their wants, or can kind of like, we can do things in an indeterminate, like not determinate, a full-on negation field in the world. Okay, you know, I want berries, I go get berries. I did that because I wanted berries. You know, there wasn't an acting or like causal thing. I'm acting in according to my desire, will, appetites, if that's how you learn from Hobbes or Stoics, but I'm acting that way. Versus, you know, determinism, which would look, and I'm doing hard determinism here. So libertarianism, philosophical word for free will, not a political party, means free will advocate, and determinism, causal advocate or proponent. And that means we do things because of external causes. Okay, big word, external causes, not like perceived like Kant causes, but external things. So I could go get those berries that I want and desire, but someone can look and go, oh, that's just, you know, that's just a consequence or effect of the harshness of the external world, you know, causing you to feel hunger, or, you know, maybe your taste buds respond to the effect of the sweetness of the berries, and that's why you desire the berries, or something like that. So there are two different ways of kind of understanding mainly action in the world. Okay, they almost always wind up going to ethics, where metaphysics kind of bleeds into ethics. It's usually almost always through these two. Mainly libertarianism comes through in the possibility of moral agency, if there can be moral agency. And determinism comes through with the possibility of culpability or guiltiness, if there can be guilt, or if there even can be a sense of self, you know, an agent to begin with. So the kind of, we haven't gotten to this yet. The thing about these concepts, which we do put them in metaphysics, and you're going to see this with every single concept we discuss, metaphysics bleeds into every other field of philosophy. I mean, it's basically the foundation to every other field. It's just these pure concepts. And when I discuss them, I kind of have to talk about them in lights of other fields besides just metaphysics. For the most part, there are a few that I can. But free will and determinism is definitely this way of looking at the world. The way I've said before, that with regards to these concepts, you know, I'm a compatibilist, which means I have a form of soft determinism and soft, you know, libertarianism in the way of thinking. And usually the way I like to express these to people is I usually go, hard determinism, we'll talk in a matter of like board games, regular games, okay? Hard determinism would be like if we're playing Candyland. Have you ever played that game?
Mm.
Okay, you ever played cards, War? It's a card game.
I played card games, but I don't know if
Okay.
these names like real.
The-
I don't remember the names, and
okay. Well, okay. And
I mean I
in
remember them,
War,
but in my language, like not in English.
oh, yeah, that's a problem. Okay, so in like Candyland, it's a game where we both get our own character, okay?
Hmm.
But the thing is, and there's a deck of cards, right? And the
Hmm.
deck is shuffled. It's completely randomized, all right? And we just take turns drawing cards and we do whatever the card tells us to do, okay? We
Hmm.
have no like there's no skill, there's no technique to winning this game. The person who won this game is very much predetermined once
Yeah,
the deck is shuffled.
but okay, yeah, I see.
Yeah. And then, like, on the other end, that'd be like hard determinism looking at the ontology of a person in the world through an ethical lens. And then on the other end, like libertarianism, like really hardcore, like everything's, consequence of will, be like being being handed a chessboard with the exact same, we'd be identical of our setup to start a game, right? And every person who won, we would usually say the person who won in those games and their actions are a one-to-one ratio of them, thinking through it, acting the way to their will, to everything like that. There's no randomness to it. There's no
Hmm.
predetermined, like, not randomness, predetermined like thing to it. We both start off the same. We are the same. Everything we see in our action is a consequence of will. And then, like, anybody who takes like a soft determinism or soft libertarianism would usually, I'd say, like I do, I would say a great way to approximate in the game is like you're handed a chessboard against, people or multiple people, but the pieces have been randomized. It's procedurally generated. Some people start with more pieces, some people start with less, and they can be placed anywhere in the game that, anywhere on the board that wouldn't, create a contradiction. All right. With the game itself, the set of axioms. So getting this to like metaphysics, this would be like what we know in Hegelianism and through Heidegger is like being born into the world. They use a term where they say Heidegger says you are thrown into time or the world.
Hmm.
Hegel says, your spirit is you're thrown into spirit or Geist. So this would be more so seeing your will. You do have will. You can act in a certain way, and you can do it in a way that is consistent with your morality. So it is a consequence of that. But the thing is, you are within a certain like historical epic, or within kind of like within a preset notion of facts. Going to epistemology when we were talking about coherent um, ideas. So I feel like this is kind of um, when we talk about determinism and free will. I feel like people more so there are outliers, but a lot of people who have been studying philosophy tend to gravitate more towards like the soft determinism, soft free will,
Hmm.
and kind of the idea that being just like analytical and continental, being the area they want to study or something,
Hmm.
they gravitate towards one the soft or the other. And then you have weirdos like me who go, I want both, and we try to combine them both. But it's important to know when defining these concepts, because these are really big concepts, that they are just concepts or held beliefs by certain people. They can be, a really big deal given the conversation, but ultimately they're not supposed to be something that is supposed to be something out in the world as far as it's metaphysical. It's supposed to be
Hmm.
like if I can choose or I can do anything, okay, that just means, I should be able to not have to worry about, the pre-existing, the external effects or anything like that. I can just go about, and that obviously
Yeah,
isn't
but
the case.
where this will originates? Like we know that we are living in this physical world, right?
Yes.
And in this physical world, there's every event has a previous event. And well, we may talk about human, this idea of cause, right? That,
Yeah.
that we don't see the cause, but still we all presuppose that things
we do the equation. It is the case that if P, then it is the case that if Q, then P. That's the rigorous way of saying, there has to be something that brought the P there in the first place, so I can say there's the P.
Yeah, and in physical, like there are certain laws of nature which you can break, and you are a part of nature, and your body works according to these laws.
Yeah.
So you may have language, and language, for me it seems that language actually may may affect the way how you behave, but still, like where does language comes from? Language comes from your interaction with your environment, and so it's very hard to tell that there's some cause, as they call causa sui, right? The cause of itself, which is the will, right? So the will is basically there. It's not bounded by anything. It may just choose out of out of many options, and it's not determined by previous events, by previous causes, by previous choices. It's just just goes.
See, that'd be like that's kind of like getting to almost a Nietzschean or like Stoic take on the will, where they just feel like the Stoic one is, or even Sartre, the Stoic one is almost the idea that if my will is free, you can do anything to my body, but my will still be free. And I usually look and I go, bullshit. But it's not so that, because it's not that I'm saying that one doesn't affect the other. I do think they definitely have an effective, I could affect what you want or desire by, probing the electrodes in your brain or something like that, or maybe something even less invasive, like I can show you commercials over and over and over again until you think what you want is what actually I've been, programming you behavioralistically to want. But the thing that I'm saying is they definitely, the will or the way we act or desires or moral agency definitely can be affected by external causes. Okay, and I'm looking at that, but I would also look and I would go, but to say it's the same thing as those external causes, I look and I go, no, that is not the case, because you just talked about where does it come from, or when this area, and someone may go, well, the will is just a cause of this, or it's just a cause of this external world. The thing is, though, I look and I go, okay, are we saying that because it actually is caused and we've observed it happening, or are we saying that because we've made the circular argument, it must be a cause, therefore it's a cause, I came up with a cause, this is what it is. Because there are a lot of things, and this was when I was pointing to art over and over again, axology, where we can try to come up with a cause, but that still supposes that the will exists, regardless of the cause that we said, external cause that it came about. Okay, and that was morality, where someone says a painting is good, and I can come up with metrics to causally ground it, where I go, it's because of the colors, the textures, or some painting line, something like that. But the fact of the matter is, the person says it's good because they think it's good. So I can give reason to that, but this all presupposes that they said it's good. That's the if P, then if Q, then P kind of expression. That you're just coming up with things prior to the fact to possibly, not even inductively, possibly why it is. So that's not even causally grounded in itself.
Yeah, but there's still, right? There's still, like every time when you ask yourself, why did you do X? You may come up with some reasons, but ultimately there must be like exact reason, maybe not one, maybe like 10 or 20 or 100, but essentially there's like every your next move is it's like goes from previous moves, and it's very hard for me to tell where, like, if there's something which may, like, it may, even if it changes the course of my actions, like this will, it's still very hard to see that it wasn't predetermined by previous, by the previous actions. Like it's
It's
maybe
hard.
they rebel against these actions, or it may be just
No one
So
said
it
arguing against determinism was easy.
yeah,
Okay,
it may have certain logic, and even if it
yeah.
doesn't have logic, even if it's just irrational, it's still like so it's it may be irrational, but it still may be deterministic.
Yeah.
Just
I mean,
you do not understand.
now rationalism, and this is something people usually get mixed up, and I need to say it really quick. There are deterministic or materialistic rationalists. They do exist, because people often conflate materialism, that's the view that the world reflects a physical world outside, with empiricism, the idea that all our knowledge is of experience. And they usually see these as mutually exclusive to each other. If you're a materialist, then you're empiricist. But we know historically that's not the case, because Spinoza was a materialist and he was a rationalist at the same time, and he actually had a view.
And Berkeley was
an empiricist and an
an
idealist.
Yeah.
So these don't go together. And the biggest thing that we see commonly, particularly, okay, we're talking about like there has to be a cause, there has to be a first cause, to everything like that. This would be going particular to Berkeley and Descartes with regards to, but they both came where everything's perceived, everything's thought of. Okay, they had to have, and even going back to Quine would be the actual person who'd be arguing with this, because we're actually arguing for a prime mover. There has to be something that starts it, or something that we can reason everything all the way down to. And that's just not the case. I mean, the thing is, if someone says there has to be something caused, there's a famous argument by Bertrand Russell at a conference where he's trying to argue the foundation of mathematics, and he supposedly brings up to the foundation of, he wasn't doing mathematics, he was doing a scientific conference, and he was talking about, I don't know why he was there, he was talking about like the beginning of the universe, and the way he said, old lady stands up and goes, you're very clever, young man, but actually the universe is on the bottom of the back of a turtle, right? And he goes, oh, okay, then what's the turtles on? And he goes, very clever, very clever. And she goes, it's turtles all the way down, is what she says. And usually when we argue, there has to be like a beginning or a cause or something that we can explain to every situation. The thing is, I look at that and I go, even something as fundamental that we see as the beginning of the universe, there exist theories, I've brought some of them up here, the no boundary weak anthropic principle, that don't go off a beginning of the universe, that are able to explain what's going on, that there is a way to explain it in a consistent manner, that it can't
somebody else may come and say, I know what happened before, and here's the entire system, metaphysics.
You remember long ago, you asked me if I thought the universe was infinite, or not, and I said I could think it's infinite, I could think it's not infinite, as neither can be tested or brought into anything. I realize any argument is just as good as the other one. Well, that can kind of go towards this beginning thing, where if neither could be tested or brought to that area where it can go past, just our own prior bias, then the causal beginnings, at that point, I go, it's just probabilistic. It's just as good as either one.
Yeah, but still, it's very hard to stop thinking about it. As soon as you start doing that, it's like,
I mean, I find
your mind just wanders. I guess it was Kant's introduction to critique of purism, like when he talked about metaphysics, saying like, there's all these questions, and seems that we haven't had any progress for a couple of thousands of years.
He's being dramatic, because at the same time he said there's no progress, but at the same time he will also say Hume woke me from my dogmatic slumber, and obviously Hume wasn't thousands of years away from you, and Hume did make a ton of progress in it. So I mean, that's just him being dramatic.
Yeah, let's touch on Kant a little bit and see how he came up with this, metaphysics of morals after
Yeah.
he like developed this transcendental philosophy. So as far as I can tell, there was this human argument about causes, and Kant and Hume realized that there's no like causal connection between events. There's simply events after events, but still
It's a correlation.
yeah,
That's pretty
and
much what he broke down.
he came up with this idea of a priori, that we put this idea of causation into events by it's just
We
simply,
order them.
yeah, it's like it's the function of our understanding. And Kant discovered lots of other propositions and ideas related
Foundational, he called them foundational categories of reality, is what he kind of saw. And you had cause, effect, god damn, this has been a while. Time
and space. Yeah, time and space.
Yeah,
and basically time and space, it's sort of intuitions. So they are not properties of things in themselves. It's basically our understanding or our reason just when it combines all these appearances, it puts or projects these principles.
It projects our understanding out onto the world, is what happens.
Them, and that's what
these are all like the worst, because if we're going to talk about Kant, transcendental philosophies, and like metaphysics, the big thing we have to do is like designate the modality of Kant, which is like Kant's ideas of truths, which are contingent and necessary truths, which are, contingent truths would be like from things that we know by a matter of fact, truths, matters of fact, or things that we discover around the world. We can support them with evidence, but they're not true in themselves. They're not something that follows. Versus, what he would say necessarily truths are things that follow from stated things, deductive, kind of something, what is it? Russell used to use all bachelors are unmarried. That'd be like something that's necessarily true. And, this ties into synthetic and analytical truths. The necessary would be, you have necessary analytical truths that seem to go together, truths of reasoning that follow from one another, and you have synthetic truths of the world, or things that we learn contingent through supported facts. And then on top of that, we've already used the terms. You have the terms a priori and terms a posteriori. So prior, a priori just translates into prior knowledge. It means prior knowledge that you're holding. So all bachelors are unmarried would be an example of something we prior know. We know that bachelor means unmarried, and unmarried means bachelor, and they follow from one another. And posteriori would be something that we discover in the world. Like I discover that my sink is running in the next room, okay? Because I hear it, I have things to support it. I don't know, just following, from, the sounds or anything. I have to walk over and I'm gonna go, yes, the sink is running.
So combine two perceptions to experience and make a judgment.
Yes.
Based on your experience.
Now that we've gotten to judgments, to that area, now we can start going. So we have those are the modality of the transcendental idealism or philosophy. And then we get the transcendental philosophy deals specifically with the categories that we use given this modality to see the world. I've been talking about a lens a lot of the time. This is the forming of the lens. This is what it is. And the biggest one I probably want to talk about is cause and effect categories, because Kant was very adamant that cause and effect weren't things out in the world that actually happened. We put them out. Yep. And him putting cause and effect as, our projectors, he would call this the synthetic a priori, things about the world that we have prior knowledge of, that we kind of inherit from, okay? which there's a lot of disagreement with that, but we'll take that as it is for Kant. And he would say, basically, we take these things, we project them on the world, they do not actually exist on the world. And specifically, cause and effect can be whole is probably the reason we got the famous terms, the phenomena in noumena, why those came out.
Mm-hmm.
The world of noumena, the world of things in itself, and phenomena, the world of as we experience it or have our projector approximating everything. The main reason with this is if cause and effect are indeed something that's internal, then I can in no way say I have a link between things in the actual world, or I can do anything to the world. I can only do things to my approximations of those things. I can't actually affect the actual world. I can't do anything. Or it can't even affect me. It can't even come back to the steroids because it's just a matter of my approximation. Now, it should be said that with morality, the grounding of metaphysics of morality, we get to this conversation where someone goes, okay, well, if this is the case, I can't cause or effect or have anything going on in the world with my morals, then can I ever have an ethical action and anything, or a genuine ethical action? Because none of anything, because morals are purely metaphysical, can affect the morality of anybody else because cause and effect are up here. They can't be in their area. Now, so this was a huge problem. Kant, though he came up with the categorical imperative and tried to figure out universals that he could ground it, never was able to do it within his own work. And that I just explained why it is the foundational reason why he couldn't do it. And if you paid attention, we were talking about epistemology with functionalism and grounding speech acts. That was kind of trying to do a similar thing on an epistemological scale. And if you study the existentialist Sartre on authentic action, bringing your actions to morality out into the world, they're trying to do something. But the thing is, both those people happened post-Hegel. And the big thing that happened between Hegel and Kant is Hegel did away with this idea of the noumena. He did away with it. Said there's no way to grasp it, no way to even get to it by your own definition. And I can't do anything with it in this system of thought, or even explain it or say anything about it. Ergo, it does nothing. So it's out. And the other thing that happened is Hegel also said cause and effect. Remember how we were saying they're up here and just a projector? Hegel took them, threw them back out in the world. And that's where you get things like you were thrown into the world. You were born into more of a historicism, a time and place that absolutely does have an effect on your morality. And you can have an effect on the world similar by acting. So, yeah. The thing is, I do believe, and it's based on my own axology, that you can act in ways that are indicative or implied of your morality that do affect things in the world, okay? And they can affect you in a way that can affect your morality, that you can reflect upon and ground. So in a term that would be known, many people would identify my morality, metaphysics of morality moving into the world as what is known as an agent deontology. An agency, not patiency, agent, because a patient means you have inherent rights, and my deontology is absurdist. It is, there are no inherent rights or inherent values. They're all implied. But I would say, yes, you can do it. You can act in the world as moral agents. The only difference is you're acting in the world. It is in a world that can affect, cause and effect are outside. And this also goes into fact when we would observe, the ending of inductive reasoning versus just coming up with a probabilistic conclusion. Cause and effect is something external. It is not just a category of our mind. Time, on the other hand, I do think is a category of mind, but that's not space and time, like Einstein, just time, an arrow of time. But I don't know, that'd be like unpacking the whole thing and just saying my thoughts on it.
By agent, do you mean it's like the idea of subject, like agent? So it's like pure subject, which is
there's
not
an I. There's a subject or an agent, an acting being. Okay, the ontology has been fulfilled. There's an existing acting being. Okay,
who's not dependent on any like experience and may cause things by itself.
It can cause things. It can be affected by things. It may rely on experience. It may not rely on experience. The only thing is there's a particular, an individual being that I can identify. Okay, that isn't just like reductive.
Is it you as a body, or is it some what we call mind or soul, or?
It'd be more so this. I talked about how I break down consciousness. This would be consciousness. There's another rational.
Okay.
That I'm recognizing another analogous rational as I describe myself as an analogous
rational. Consciousness is a property of the brain, right?
Yes, it would be a category of the brain. It'd be basically all it means.
Not the same as brain, but they have like analogous, content.
Okay, so consciousness would be associated specifically with mind, not brain, because I do differ between these things. Mind, you could think of mind more like irrational or a thought, okay? Thoughts, okay? And consciousness is recognizing a similar being who I'm supposing has those thoughts. When I basically go, that person is like me, categorically speaking, because they have a similar, because of actions or anything, I'm implying they also have thoughts, okay? And when I look at that, that's consciousness. And then when I say they're an agent, okay, so the deontology to say that someone is an agent or has personhood can be broken down into, do they have the capability to act? Are they aware of the world that they are in? And do they have a moral? Are their actions indicative of morality, okay, or values? If they fulfill those three areas, I would say that is a person or an agent right there. Those are actions of theirs. Of course.
But how do you know? Like, how do you know? You just interpret their behavior, or you have a conversation and they tell you, I'm a rational being, and
you can have tons of different ways of trying to justify it. You can have that behavioralist like conversation or observe them. You can open their skull and like actually observe like.
Yeah, but you can see consciousness, right? It's just
no, you can. And this is kind of the if you remember in our epistemological thing where I went against like the 3 reductive series of mind, and I said this is why this fails: this functionalism, identity theory, and behavioralism. I said this is why this fails, this is why this fails, and this is why this fails. In all cases, what I'm trying to say is I can have these things where I imply it with like evidence, but I'm not observing the mind. I'm not actually getting the rationality. I'm not observing a thought bubble that it's popping up at your head when you're talking to me that actually has, the thoughts right there. We're not a cartoon. If we were in the universe of discourse or possible world of Garfield, maybe that would happen, but we're not. So, no, damn.
Yeah, but still, it's not knowledge, right? So it's
no, it wouldn't be knowledge by my own definition, because it cannot be observed.
Some sort of educated guess, like, okay, this person behaves this way, and it's
constantly coming to a probable conclusion based off incomplete observations. It's just that continual hypothesis or abductive reasoning. So, because I can't observe their actual consciousness, I can't have that, inductive, like observed then, like there's the fact right there. I can just observe things that are indicative of it. Another good way to think of this is when someone's sick near you, if someone gets sick, usually you can tell that they're sick or what they're sick with because you observe their symptoms. Like you observe that runny nose, high fever, sweats or something. But the symptoms are not the actual disease. They're things that you say are indicative of this disease. You're not actually observing the disease. So a lot of ways, the thing is we can get a microscope and we can observe the disease and we can have that, but we don't have the same, instrument, at least not yet. Maybe we will in the future, and then I'll have to change my position because I don't want to be dogmatic, but we don't have the same observation of consciousness at the same time. And even if we did, that's not really an approximation of how we interact with one another, because I'm interacting with you assuming a moral agent, and I sure as hell don't have an instrument to observe your consciousness right now. So that's just kind of that.
Can you tell me a little bit more? How did you come from hard determinism to compatibilism, like this linguistic equation? Like not the not the final answer, but the way how you how you come up with that.
The problem that I came from hard determinism, which I'd be hard determinist in the vein of Epicurean determinism, which is everything can be reduced to kind of down to like an atomic or almost a sense of matter and external causes. And I came from that to what I would say is a Hume understanding of a compatibilism, which is to say, yeah, there are external causes and they do affect everything, but I also have this kind of moral agency or, thing that I recognize in other people that on a linguistic, just kind of more on a model scale, it's helpful, useful, or not even helpful or useful, but more accurate at representing my reality is kind of what it'll come at. So the way I mainly got to it was I had the hard determinism and I was able to address most of the problems with hard determinism of epistemology and a lot of the problems of axiology, specifically through more of a behavioralist understanding of ethics is the way that I took at it. I saw everyone as just doing something as a consequence of being raised in the society that they were in and kind of learning through those areas. The thing that really started throwing a wrench in it was when I first read Hegel's lecture on aesthetics, which was
aesthetics?
This idea, aesthetics.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So philosophy of art. And Hegel was trying to do everything he could do to reduce down, almost in a behavioralistic or scientific way, why we think these art pieces are good. This piece of art or this piece of art, is, functionally good from an external, property. And he starts off in the very beginning with this really heavy-handed thing, like the best types of art, because they are more reducible, are like linguistic, like poetry or sung songs or things that we can easily reduce down. Okay. But as he goes on reasoning, what winds up happening is this reasoning starts unwinding the more he tries to apply it to things in the world and his understanding, because of abstract pieces of art, orchestrated things that he doesn't even understand, music on a scale or how to notate it, but it still moves him in such a way or something like that, And what happens is the subjective experience, that he admits that he's had and he's coming, to these conclusions, he has to admit that he doesn't have prior knowledge of the metrics and everything. Someone else out there might have it or eventually have it, but he doesn't, as he's experiencing these things, and he's coming to moral conclusions about these things at the same time, that I do like this thing, that, or I hate it, or, I have judgments about this thing that I cannot fully express through known metrics. They just are, is the thing. So at this point where we look and we go, oh, it's just purely a societal concept. It's just purely a societal thing moving in. Well, there's clearly this filter here that is coming to these conclusions, real judgments about how they actually feel, is authentically representing them. And that can change from person to person to person living in a very similar society. Yep. And each can express it in a manner that, we talked about qualifiers in language a bit. where they can express it in a manner like it's my opinion, it's my belief that you can't even argue or justify against. It wouldn't be able to be an epistemological skeptical scrutiny.
Yeah, well, there's so much is going on inside of like, not just in your environment, but how you process all this information. So it may depend on your genetics and
Yeah,
not only
it could be your genetics. It could be all. It could be reducible. It could be. I'm not saying. Understand, I am never saying. Just from my understanding of modality, never take from one of my assertions that anything is impossible. Okay, never take that, because that would be, I would be betraying my own epistemology at that point.
Is it possible that you're gonna get back to hard determinism?
Possible.
Okay.
It could happen. I mean,
or maybe new, like there's hard indeterminism, like compatibilism, hard determinism, hard indeterminism.
Yep. Nothing.
I guess the last version is that they deny free will and they have no idea whether or not determinism is true.
Yes. So, like,
I guess I'm like somewhere.
a better way of we got the Hegel part. Now let's get the Hume part, which the Hume part is what I would call. I shat a little bit on pragmatism, but this is something I would call good pragmatism. Is what I would call what Hume did, and Daniel Dennett, modern philosopher, does this a little bit when he talks about it. And Dennett's pretty hard deterministic, but he talks about this when he goes, look, regardless if it's an indeterminate world or a determinate world, it could be either of these possibilities, but I still have in either case, I still have these people acting around me that I'm implying value and I have to deal with. So logically, this would be what's called separation of cases, which is a theorem that basically states if we have a case of if P then R, or if Q then R, these are two premises, and we can say it's either P or Q. In either case, we have to deal with R. Okay, it'd be either way. Another way to show this would be Bertrand Russell once made a hypothesis, which he called the 5-minute hypothesis, where he said, imagine the possibility that our reality was created 5 minutes prior to your existence right now. All your memories, everything were placed there. Everything was placed exactly like it is. You could not in any way discern, if, this was the case or it wasn't the case. And the way he solves this is like, if it is the case that the 5-minute hypothesis is true, I have to act, in this certain way as if it is true. If it's not true, I still have to act as if it is true. And I'm saying the same thing of agency. If it is the case I'm being affected by, an external world and everything I'm doing is just a consequence of it, I'm going to act as if I have agency because I do believe I believe the I is true. Or that's the only way I can act or do anything is to assume that it is.
Yeah, but still, you'll have different emotions. Like when you believe that you are just affected by whatever external world, you'll act, but it will change the way you act, right? So you'll probably not worry about the future as much as you may worry if you have many choices and you have to think constantly, whatever. Like every choice affects my life, right?
It absolutely could affect a person. It also could absolutely not affect a person. They could immediately just go back to the things as they were doing after considering it. In either case, they're going back to doing the thing that I'm representing and implying a morality of them. So ultimately, I should put out, and I'm really heavy-handed about this with morality and actions in there. It is implied to me. It is just something we observe, like we're just implying it. We believe it. It's not fully justified. Okay, it can't be justified. And so that's really where the soft determinism comes in and going, acknowledging this is the limits of my observation. There's still some sense of determinism in this, but I'd be lying if I'm not considering moral actions in a way. So
yeah, I think it's the problem which is going to be here forever. As soon as there will be human beings, they'll just argue, and it all depends on as far as I can tell, for me, just I've read certain guys who were determinists, like Schopenhauer and
Yeah.
Nietzsche and others, and they expressed their views much more, persuasively than the
Yeah.
other guys who advocated for free will. And I believed in free will for my entire life prior to encountering Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. And after that, I couldn't get back and just think that I have free will. But still, I always have these questions like maybe there's something better. I'm trying to find, read lots of literature, trying to find somebody who argues as rigorously as they argued. And it's very and mostly it's not even logical. So you see the point here, like there are lots of guys who argue for free will and they are consistent. They, there's like 100 pages. I read everything. It's perfect. There's nothing I can, can point out and say this is like wrong or incorrect. And still, it doesn't make me feel, I just read and just some, some logic, but there's no, I can't relate to it. I can't, it doesn't resonate with me.
Yeah.
Whereas when I read somebody who talks about determinism, it's like, wow, this is how I feel. This is how it works.
The important thing is, I would say, you can do whatever, anything like that. The important with agreeing with people or disagreeing with them, it's always, I look at them like, make sure you're not agreeing with this person just because of where they end up. The justification or the good faith of an argument lies in the argument itself, coming from one area to the other. The ends never justify the means in logic or rational reasoning. It's always in the soundness of the argument itself. That being said, sound arguments still have to assume things to, just work, to start going. And the thing is, someone could have a sound argument, the most, like you said, 100 pages of sound argument, but you could disagree with them axiomatically. And so, that's nice. So, yeah.
Let's move on and talk a little bit about, the value of metaphysics in so-called ordinary world. For, is there any value for people who just live their lives and don't think about deep questions?
To this, I bring up a concept by my favorite contemporary philosopher, Quine. By far my favorite.
He's on my reading. He's on my reading list. I guess I'll read him after John Searle.
Okay, he's one, if not the best analytic philosopher to read, and the worst analytical philosopher to listen give a lecture. He is terrible, like terrible speaker, but excellent writer. But the thing that I usually come up with this is what Quine called his web of beliefs. Okay, and when people go, well, what's the value of metaphysics, or what does it matter? And I go, because behind all your epistemological or moral value problems or anything, I almost assure you, when you start reducing and trying to actually understand it, there's a metaphysical assumption or belief at its very core that is sitting there and holding it together. And the thing is, like you said, often these are almost dogmatic. There's something that we just say it has to be or the case. And because of this assumed dogmatic ontology with some of them, we can find that our entire lens or grasping of the world or concepts of the world of our ordinary life are rooted in bad faith. We've never actually challenged them. So whereas, I once said epistemology is where the rubber meets the road, and the same can kind of be said of ethics. It's where we find the applied, where we, we apply these things and we see what happens. Metaphysics would be, we're no longer concerned with the rubber meeting the road, but what we are concerned is if our beliefs, regardless of even applying them, make sense to ourselves. Can we even, just trying to explain what we believe or what the foundational beliefs for morality, ethics, or epistemology, make sense to even ourselves? Can we even convince ourselves in an internal, motivated kind of review? So, and I think it's very important for people because so much of the life that we live today is caught up in the rat race of life and whatever. We often forget to just take the time, sit down, and honestly try to work out some of our beliefs and be like, do I actually believe this? Is this belief mine? Is it justified, to myself? Are we being epistemically responsible with our beliefs, is what I'd be saying. And this is where metaphysics, having the toolbox of logic and understanding, it's not just about its application, it's that I'm actually taking time to understand it in myself, comes into play. So yes, I would say metaphysics has a huge role to play in everyday life.
Yeah, but if somebody else says that everything is going well, what's the matter? I don't want to waste my time and think deeply. If I discover something that if I don't want to discover some inconsistencies or whatever, just I live just usual life, work.
It could be going well because they actually have like they reached their nirvana of like perfect beliefs and balance, and it could be that's a possibility. It could be that it's going well because they're completely ignorant. They're ignorant is bliss, and just no introspection moving forward, and that just soothes them. But the only way I'd point out, if it is this case or it is the case that it's either perfect nirvana, or if it's not because it's introspective, the only way to tell in both instances is to try to do it and actually see to address it, because this would be getting back to agency in the will or the beliefs under self. I'd be like, if you've never addressed it, even if it's things are going well, it could be going well just because you're acting out the causal actions of the ethic or the world that you live in, and those may not even be your beliefs. That isn't to say that if you sit there and you examine them, you'll come to completely different conclusions, but at least you could say that you're making your actions as indicative of them, and your own thoughts more your own. You're making them yours. So that's just what I'd say.
I have a sense that many people live in a kind of this sensual world, so they don't think too much. They simply again work, have family, eat, have fun, go somewhere. And for me, when I think about philosophy, sometimes I don't find any practical reason, but the process of thinking itself, like that's what I really like. So sometimes I may just sit at home and do nothing for an entire day, but just observe, don't even think, but observe the stream of my consciousness, certain ideas coming up, maybe write something down. And for me, this has more value, for example, often it has more value than doing something, actually. And I think that this metaphysics, it's this ability to kind of get in this mental space from the world of daily concerns and just stay there as long as possible.
I mean, I would argue to people, take the time to ask yourself these questions, think these out, find some time in your day, just like, I find I have like a workout regimen, and I try to find it to keep my body healthy. Metaphysics very much in this case is like trying to keep my mind healthy. It's trying to keep that functioning just kind of in the same way. And it's so easy to, like you said, lose ourselves in the grind of the day-to-day world. But this was Bertrand Russell's argument for was it leisure or downtime? And he said we need to have more leisure and time just to sit, or Derrida even he called it aporia, which is just the idea that we sit and we think, we actually consider, we have more time just to sit down and consider our own thoughts.
It's like almost a Buddhist monk, like sitting in meditation.
It could be. It could be me, sitting in my chair, usually it's me sitting sitting in my couch, petting my dog, and just zoning out and letting my thoughts go, and, or
I guess I'll ask you a few more questions, and
Okay.
we'll probably leave the topic of ontology for the next time.
Okay. That's a pretty big one, so that's fair.
Yeah, actually, there's like four pages I wrote on ontology. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, by studying or writing something from the internet, from Wikipedia, Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. There's some
Yep.
concepts. So, are there limits to our consciousness?
Maybe, maybe not.
In our language? Like, can we?
Okay.
Okay.
There are limits to our language. I will say that, and I will say, if you remember our conversation in what was it? Epistemology, when we were talking about representationalism and reference, and kind of the grounding of our thoughts in our language. I will say, yes, there are limits to language. There are like having a one-to-one ratio and certainty of language to what you thought. Yeah, there are limits. You don't have that. I'm saying it's mathematically impossible. And this is strictly speaking language as it is communications from one being to another. I'm not
but in
not
terms
necessarily
of imagination, like imagining something, and creating metaphysical worlds, and even probably living in these worlds, not in a physical sense, but in your thoughts.
You once asked me and I brought this up earlier in the conversation, if I thought the world was if I thought the universe was infinite. Right? You said, I think you said yes or no, and I said I don't know. But what I can say, and that was what I actually mean, which is I don't know. I have no idea. But what I can say is, if the real universe, actual reality, is infinite, then the abstract or imagination regarding it is infinity plus one, specifically omega plus one.
If it's finite.
The things that we can consider when we kind of disconnect ourselves from reality and just deal with imagination itself, or with concepts or the abstract, is so much more grand and ridiculous. Like, one of your questions on that thing was also, and I brought up, what is infinity? And so many people, think they have a grasp on what infinity is. And, any mathematician would be like, no, you don't. And, there are countable types of infinities. There are greater sums of infinities than the other. There are infinities that deal with like orders of strings going on forever that don't have commutative properties and break the foundational rules of logic, like symmetry of relations, identity statements. There are infinitesimal infinities that can never be, a thing or a number that we can imagine. They're just always shrinking down. They're, or with more abstract things, people look and they think, circles are a concrete thing. And every single time someone looks and they're like, circles are a concrete thing out in the world. And I go like, well, in abstract terms, that's not a circle at all. That's an infinitesimal varying set of infinitely triangles that we are over approximating. But the abstract, so many people, even with string theory or just an M theory, are coming to the idea of 11 dimensions, when a mathematician will look at you and like, no, there's possibly infinite dimensions, and there's infinite dimensions of those infinite dimensions. So we can talk about it is like, if applied reality, applied sciences and studies are like in the or in the year 2022 with the rest of us, the abstract fields are like hundreds of years ahead in the future, like or maybe even more, that we may or may not get to, just because they're flying ahead. Because
it's really hard now to imagine, like, after the invention of the internet, it always strikes me when I looking for some lectures and I find some content which is just so bloody amazing, and I see it was published just 10 years ago, or even earlier, and why I couldn't find it earlier? Like what? Like how much of such content is there on the internet? And I think it's like infinite. So it all depends on not on the content, but on me, like processing through, going through these, various types of content and just discovering more and more. And I always think that it's, I wasn't just ready to find it. And then I think about different languages. Like, what if I studied German or Chinese? Like, how much content I can find then?
Yeah.
And it seems that people just doing, like, just in terms of lectures, there are hundreds of courses of lectures which I already want to watch, and it's just in English, and there's probably the same amount in other languages. And another question is, like, does it make sense to watch all of this? And I can't, like, there's a constant argument kind of inside my mind, which is, okay, on the one side, like, I don't actually find anything new. So whatever I find is just different versions of what I knew before, but they are a little bit better or worse. They help me to clarify what I knew before. But on the other hand, sometimes I encounter something new, and I see that it's not like new. It's even hard to tell in which way it's new. It's I've read Critique of Empiricism like 8 years ago in Russian. I studied it in depth. Like, I dedicated half a year probably, like, just studying this one book, not talking to anybody, just writing, analyzing what was going on, reading other volumes of Kant. And then I forgot all of this. And now I start studying English, and I read the same book, and I find something that I didn't understand before in Russian. And even just these concepts, how I, like, when I process them, it feels as if I just get into somewhere where I wasn't, like, before.
It almost feels like a part of the universe just opened up for you.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
It just that you didn't even know was there before, and you're like, oh my God, all these possibilities.
Yeah, but again, and then the same questions, like, does it even make sense? What if I just don't I know it's infinite. I can study it, like, for the rest of my life, and I'll never come up with final satisfaction saying, now I know everything, there's no point to study anything more. And at the same time, I want to make something, and, like, this constant kind of inner argument, like, getting more content, or reducing it to what I already have and starting making something.
Carl Sagan once said something in a book titled The Demon Haunted World that really stuck with me. And he said, our understanding of the development of our cognitive faculties, or understanding of the world, or how we grasp things, can be understood as a relationship between skepticism and wonder, which is, and the way that I see it is, epistemology in the applied areas, we bring our skeptical friend along, and he constantly goes, how do we apply this? What's the use? How can we be falsified, and constantly question. Metaphysics in these pure areas, where things open up and get crazy like this. This is where we tell our skeptical friend, sit this out, and we, like an old skeptical man, just sit this out, and we grab this wonderful, wondrous child who just says, why can't this be this way? Or how can this be? And things just keep popping. You feel almost that childlike, just like, oh my God, like things that you thought were grounded, or that you thought the world was just this way. It turns out, no, it can be beyond anything you could even imagine. And the thing is, people will look and be like, yeah, I could be doing this forever. I would never satisfy that. But I look at that and I go, oh, good. I have something to do for the rest of my life. I don't have to worry about running out.
Yeah.
Like,
When I discovered English, actually, I almost had something like that already in Russian language. So I came, like, to the point where there was nothing to read, and I couldn't find anything for probably for an entire year. Just, everything seemed boring and dull, and open up like any book, I just read a few pages and it's just, I don't want to read it. It's just some kind of crap. And then I started studying English, and it's as if, anything what I read is just amazing, brilliant, and I can learn from some cheap literature. It makes me feel so great. And I was thinking, wow, this is like, I grasp something like, even if I get to the same point in English language, I can take like then German or Chinese or Latin and basically like do the same thing over and over in different languages.
Yep.
And there's like infinite amount, not infinite, but there are so many languages. Even if we come to the point where life will be almost infinite, there will be still something to do. I mean, with technology.
Well, once we have all the facts, all the knowledge, in this one place or anything like that, I will more than happily walk up with a word called schmookalidong and place it on the thing and walk away.
Yeah, but again, it seems like you may learn everything, but there's no limits to your creativity. You may start creating stuff and making them forever. And again, there's so many.
Just assume it.
Yeah, there's so many, like in every discipline in science, there are so many people who are doing it now. Like if you take metaphysics, there's
even in science. Remember, we had that talk about atoms and the thing that back in the day, someone would be like, you can't split atoms because I defined them as something that you can't split, and therefore it means this and this, And then we find out later that yes, you can, and it turns out that things that and that's why I said about my skepticism with regards to fact. I will never say with regards to fact that anything is impossible, because there's a good chance that down the road, first of all, it's bad faith, and second of all, there's a good chance down the road that you're going to be proven wrong. There's always the possibility, as long as you're saying that I base my facts on evidence, that you could be proved wrong. This also goes for the inverse, that with regard to the facts, not saying that something is true for all cases or necessarily true, because you can infer from that when you say something is necessarily true, at the same time, you're saying its inverse, so is impossible. Its negation is impossible. That's what you're saying at the exact same time, which is not an act of contingent or factual scientific truth. It is bad faith, is what it is. So, but yeah, so no, just study it for fun. You don't need to have any reasons. That's why I do it. It's worth time. So better than half the things I see other people doing. So not more. So
yeah, I guess we're going to stop here.
Okay.
Thank you for this amazing conversation. I think next time we're going to take, I actually suggest that we may take one on some particular philosopher conversation on Kant or on Quine, or
I feel like we've already covered quite a bit of Kant. I mean, there is more, but just like consequence explaining some of these ideas, we've done a lot of.
Yeah, we take on Schopenhauer or Nietzsche.
Okay. I mean, I'd be more prone to Nietzsche than Schopenhauer. I'm not a big fan of Schopenhauer. I prefer Nietzsche a little bit more.
Yeah, I actually had a conversation on Nietzsche, like previous dialogue with a guy who runs Nietzsche podcast.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah, you guys were talking about the different wills, the will to act, the will to power, the will to live.
Yeah.
As a person who studied, Germans are so goddamn dramatic, man. And it's just like everything, like it's the will, or Hegel's over here like Geist. It has to be this dramatic thing. It's like, Jesus, man, settle down.
What was it? Din an dich? No. Din an sich. Din an sich.
Din an sich.
Yeah. Thing itself.
I don't know. I mean, they take themselves pretty seriously.
Okay, I'm gonna stop recording.
Okie dokie.